What's up and welcome to the Level Health Podcast. Today, Josh is interviewing Andy Chan. Andy has recently co-authored the book Dynamic Balance, Integrating Principles of Traditional Chinese Medicine into Strength and Conditioning. He's also a trainer, certified strength and conditioning coach, and he has his master's in exercise science. Big thanks to Andy for coming on our show. You can follow him on Instagram or check out his book Dynamic Balance. We'll have links for where you can find him in the description below. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
So as somebody who has written not a book, and that seems like an incredibly daunting task, but I enjoy writing blogs. I like putting my, working through my thoughts on paper, well, on a computer sometimes, but you know what I mean? Putting words down, it kind of helps me process thoughts and things like that. So like as someone who appreciates that process, what was your goal behind writing this book? And then how was that process for you? Was it difficult?
I'd say well, first of all, a bit of backstory about how this book came about. You know, I was in school doing my master's in exercise science, and as part of the master's program, we have to do a statistics course because we have to learn to interpret statistics and research so that we can read the research paper and interpret, etc. And inside that course, for one of the projects, we get to pick our own PICO question. So we get to pick our own question that we could kind of dig into research about. And at the time, you know, I had this curiosity in cubbing because, so a little bit about my background, I'm from Hong Kong, but I spent 10 years in the US. So I have a good mixture of background and understanding in terms of life, I would say. And, you know, growing up, Chinese medicine has always been weird, let's just say, because I think if you go to these malls in the US, you always see that massage store that you have no idea what's going on, you know, kind of dodgy, and no one's able to explain to you what Chinese medicine means. No one's able to explain to you or explain to me the tangible benefits other than the herbs, the herbal drinks that I have to drink. So, but this all changed when I saw, I guess, when the world saw the Michael Phelps pictures where he had cupping marks on his back, right? And the exercise community, I think they were trying to figure out what cupping is, whether it's safe, yada, yada, yada. So as part of the project, I figured as an exercise professional, I'll look into research to look into the efficacy of cupping so far. And while I was doing my homework or my research per se, when I was looking online, I could basically see two sides of information. The first side would be the Western side, more on exercise science or from the exercise science perspective, human movement science. And there, they mainly focus on fascia, so the connective tissue that mainly wraps around the muscle, myofascia, specifically for cupping. So the research examined the efficacy of cupping in terms of measuring whether adhesions or knots could be released or at least be alleviated. On the other side of the equation is the Chinese side, because that's where the methods originated. And this is where things got a bit mystical, because I would go on these Chinese medicine websites and they will use languages that even me as a native Chinese speaker did not understand. And in the entrepreneurial spirit of me, I was like, hey, I think a lot of us as an exercise professional, we kind of ask ourselves, what can we contribute to the industry? Because I think that, I mean, I'm going off a tangent here, but I think if we can play to our own strength, if we can play a part, then money will come. Yeah. And I think for me, why don't I use my background so that I can get in touch with the right people and kind of unpack the TCM language so that as an exercise professional, not only can they understand the Western perspective of cupping, acupuncture, Chinese medicine, but they can actually have an Eastern perspective. And that's kind of how this book came about, to break down the seemingly esoteric and ancient Chinese medicine language so that we can utilize it for better recovery and training.
Man, that's seems like a daunting task, but in and of itself, right? Because I'm sure that you've seen the kind of the pendulum swinging the other direction on some of these tactics and these tools. Like, for instance, I'm gonna call him out. There's a guy here that runs what he called the torture room. It's a massage, you know, he does body work, stuff like that. But he scrapes to the point of bleeding. He cups to the point of bruising. Everything is about pain. And so like it definitely seems like you have your work cut out for you, man, because not only do you have to, you know, kind of bridge that gap, which so far in your book you've done an excellent job of, by the way, because I think that me personally, I am always going to be a skeptic on something. But like you said, when you see people are using these techniques, people have used these techniques for countless years. Like, it's kind of hard to argue with that, and it's really silly of us. I mean, how many times do we have to be fooled thinking that we've already figured everything out with Western science before we realize that there's a lot more to it than a lot more to us, the human body, the human system. Like, we don't know very much at all about the human organism, and it's just interesting to think that potentially over the countless generations these things were developed and they're being passed on, and now you're trying to kind of bridge that gap between you know, the old ways, and how can we apply that to science. So what are kind of some of the core principles then, as it, because I mean, you were trying to direct this almost cultural force towards strength and conditioning, and that's a very interesting perspective to take. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. I would say the main difference or the main principle that we're trying to get across, the core message, is that the body is an interconnected unit. And I think traditionally in the West, quote unquote, I think we have been looking at things in isolation. But
Yeah.
you know, in recent years, we know that any sports medicine team, you have a nutritionist, you have dietitian, you have a sports medicine professional, you have a strength and conditioning coach. Because in order for athletes to maximize their performance, well, actually, we have to look at multiple different aspects of life. And the idea that we can just look into one aspect in isolation, I think it's fallacious in a way. And and so I think that the whole point of our book is, well, we have to look at things holistically, but not in the spiritual sense, but actually just kind of well-rounded, look at everything as an interconnected unit. And well, guess what? People have been doing it for thousands of years, and it's not like this is a new concept. Uh, and I want to emphasize that, you know, I didn't come up with the concept of everything is interconnected. It is my job to point it out that actually people figured this out long ago. It's just, I think in the past 20, 30 years, we zoomed in isolation. So I'd say that's kind of the main overarching principle of our book, that everything is inseparably linked.
That's kind of the beauty of potentially this field, like applying these principles and stuff to athletes, because you're going to get you know, objective data, quantifiable data pretty quickly. And I mean, you just kind of see these kind of waves go through where they're like, okay, sports psychology, people are really realizing that sports psychology is important, so everybody has a sports psychologist, everybody's seen that. So there's definitely a lot that goes into it. What was it difficult for you to navigate, like to walk that line though? Because I'm sure at certain points you're like, man, this seems a little bit kind of too woo woo. How am I going to phrase this in a way so that can not easily be accepted, but be, you know, digestible to people?
Oh, for sure. I think there are two ways to look at this question. One is, whenever you write a book, there's a lot of communication that goes on, especially because in this project I collaborated with a Chinese medicine practitioner who is from Hong Kong, who holds a PhD in Chinese medicine. Her name is Stella Wong. And I think growing up in the US, I like things in a black and white manner. So, you know, you either explain to me what it is, or, you know, it just doesn't make sense to me, because that's how we we process things. But in Chinese medicine, they explain something through imagery. So a lot of times they explain a metaphor through another metaphor. And you're like, okay, so what are you trying to get at? And so I think that one of the hardest points was for Stella to communicate with me what the terms means. And then after that, I have to process it so that the fitness pros will comprehend and digest. So I think there are definitely a lot of times within the writing process that I go, okay, so there's philosophical meaning here, which means I have to elaborate more on a little bit of the historic background, like the word qi, for example, right? Because we hear that word, but well, actually in the Chinese language, the word is usually combined with other things when you use the word. So we often, or we seldom only use the word qi as people do in the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting how little we have a culture in the United States, but also how we've kind of, I mean, especially having that scientific mindset. I mean, so you finished your master's degree in the United States. Is there a big difference between, and this is just a little bit of a side tangent I want to ask, and between the school systems in the United States and in China or in Hong Kong?
I think so. I think it is a sensitive time to say this, but I, as a person from Hong Kong, I'm super proud of the fact that I got educated in the United States, because I think in the US, we are taught to think outside the box. I think throughout the education system, we're taught to be different. We are taught to express our views. We're taught to critically evaluate information, although some do it better than the others, obviously. But I think all these mindsets are good to have, because if I'm not educated in the US, maybe this book wouldn't even come about, because I wouldn't even have attempted to think outside the box of, collaborating with someone outside of my industry. So I think there's a big difference within the education system.
Very cool, very cool. So have there been any of the ideas in this, in your, I'm gonna say ideas, because it's like it's not like you're like, oh, these are just my ideas, but of these principles, I'm going to say, have there been any of these principles that the fitness industry or the fitness space have like embraced right away, or has there been some that they've really pushed back on in particular?
I think the one that I actually learned in my fitness education before I put it in the book is the idea that we should take a movement-based approach, or movement-based training approach, when it comes to strength and conditioning. So back onto that concept of training in isolation. I think in the 90s, when bodybuilding came about, we have learned that we have to train muscles in isolation because we want to grow bigger in size. But then I think in recent years, some people are starting to ask, okay, so if I do these isolation lifts, is that going to transfer to my on-field performance? And so then you've got another crowd of people who are saying, well, that isolation work does not translate to athletic performance because it doesn't teach us coordination. It doesn't teach us way to sequence a body to produce power in the fastest and strongest way. So with that philosophy, I think we also put it in the book, because if we assume and if we know that the body is an interconnected system, then it will make better sense if we train it that way. And in a movement-based approach, we have to teach the body to move in a sequential way and in an elegant way, as we say in the book. And I think that's one thing that the fitness industry has picked up. And for me personally, and the clients that I train, I think it has worked out well.
Yeah, it seems similar to the idea. I mean, you started out your book by talking about how you first started lifting, and you said that your approach was, I wrote this down, haphazard and random. And immediately I was like, dude, that's exactly how, I mean, it's not, I shouldn't even have to tell you, because I think, like any teenage boy starting lifting 10, 15 years ago, like it was muscle mags, it was bodybuilding.com forums. It was literally anybody that was stronger than you or bigger than you in the gym told you to do something. You assumed that they knew what they were doing, right? So that really spoke to me. No, but doubt. I mean, I think that I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by a movement-based approach. But what that seems to me is that I had a similar shift about 6 years ago, right about when I actually started making a ton of progress towards doing more compound lifts. And it's like the way that I kind of visualize, the way that I kind of perceive how I should apply design my training, and with my clients as well, is what does a human being, what are we designed to do? We need to be hip hinging, we need to be squatting, we need to be pressing above our head. I saw you had the monkey hang in your book. We need to be having our arms overhead in general. Like we need to be doing these things that human beings, the biological organism that we are, was designed to do. So if you, that was kind of my own little rant there, but if you don't mind, can you just elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by a movement-based approach?
Sure, I'll use an example. So 80% of my clients are golfers. I work with golfers of different levels in Hong Kong. And a lot of times in the strength and conditioning world, they discard golf because they think it's not an athletic movement. But if you have been on the driving range, you know how hard golf is, just hitting that small little ball. Mm-hmm. And, in golf or any rotational sport, for that matter of fact, there's a lot of rotation involved. And as a strength and conditioning coach, our priority is to help our athlete rotate better so that they can swing better. And if we just have them go onto the machine and do the disassociation where we kind of hold on to the handle with our arms and kind of twist our pelvis, I doubt that's going to translate to a better golf swing. So then if we go onto the drawing board with to think about, okay, how can I help the athlete rotate better? Well, first of all, I have to understand rotation. Okay, so there are two types of rotation. One, I can disassociate like I do in the sport, where my pelvis don't move and my spine moves because I'm disassociating my pelvis and my spine. That's first. Or I can do a cylinder rotation where I rotate both the pelvis and the spine. So I rotate them together. And I also have to work on my anti-rotation, because in a lot of sports like boxing, whenever we have to counter force that's hit upon us, and we have to learn to brace to resist any rotation that we might face. So just within the umbrella term of rotation, we have established that there are 3 different types of rotation. So then I have to figure out, okay, I have an athlete in front of me, which type of rotation is he doing well in, or she doing well in, and which type of rotation can she improve upon? And I think going from there, we can prescribe exercises that kind of works to their weaknesses and to help them move better. Because if they can move better inside the gym, we know that they will definitely move better outside the gym, and that's our ultimate goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the machines are made, I mean, they're made to, well, sell more machines, honestly. They're like, how much can we break the human body down? I know exactly the machine that you were talking about too, and I thought that was going to give me the most ridiculous obliques, and it didn't do a damn thing. It only worried me multiple times that that twisted my spine in half, because anyways, yeah, so that's not a great machine. You mentioned anti-rotation. That's a pretty important demand of our core that don't think a lot of people appreciate and or train even. So can you give us a few examples of how to train anti-rotation, improve anti-rotation of the trunk?
Sure. The go-to exercise I have is a plank shoulder tap, and plank everyone knows how to do, and you would tap the opposite shoulder with the opposite arm. So I would tap my left shoulder with my right arm. Now, the one thing that people have to look out for is your hip shift, because when people are on the floor, when you tap the shoulder, people tend to lean onto one side, and that kind of misses the entire point. So I would say I'll usually put my fingers around or just outside the hips, maybe with an inch of distance, and my athlete won't be allowed to touch my arms. So that way we know that the athlete is bracing the core, and when they tap the opposite shoulder, they're not allowed to rotate. So I would say that's usually the go-to exercise. Of course, you can progress them into the renegade row and etc., but that's all predicated on the foundation of them being in a plank with shoulder tap without tilting or rotating their pelvis.
Yeah, I mean, the plank position shoulder taps definitely, and then kettlebell pull through is one of my favorite. But I think that was worth touching on, because that's not even a realization. I think people tend to think that it's rotation, that's about it. But I'm gonna give throw a bone to some people, hook some people up here with some good advice. What are some of the problems that you see most common with golfers along these lines? What are some of the issues, and then what are some of the biggest bang for your buck exercises for golfers?
I'd say the biggest problem is people are still stuck in the isolation mindset. And I'll say that people are out there doing, I have no idea what they're doing out there. Sometimes they're just doing these random rotations on the cable. So I'll say the best exercise that they can do actually is just body weight rotations at home, so that they can learn to feel the ground. I think that's important, because in all sports, you always listen to the analysts and they say, oh, they're using the ground for power and you want to drive your hips. And I think you can do a lot of good things already at home when you're just standing and you're just learning to rotate with your pelvis, and you just kind of feel the rotation throughout the body for beginners.
Yeah, I think that's important. I don't think a lot of people rotate. How many golfers do you think are out there, and the only time they ever rotate is while they're golfing? And it might be a problem unless you're golfing every single day. I'm at the age when a lot of my friends most of my friends are golfing now, so I thought I'd give them hook up with some good advice. But I'm curious, what was the biggest thing that surprised you that you learned while you're writing this book?
The biggest surprise that I had while writing this book is a lot of the things that we're talking about now have been discussed long ago. And this is not to say that the Chinese were smarter than everyone else. That is by no means my point. But I would say that if we can all open our eyes a little bit and to look into what the ancient had to say about the body, I think we can take a lot of wisdom away from that. And on the note about us being open to more perspectives, I recommend us reading a book called Think Again by Adam Grant. In there, one of the topics that he talked about was this binary bias that we have, because when it comes to an argument, we tend to think, okay, it's either black or white. The American education that I mentioned, we like to think that it's either this or that, and I stand on this side. But a lot of times, if you look at the diamond of strength and conditioning, health and performance, there are multiple sides to it. And a lot of times the situation is so complex that it's hard to give you a black and white answer. So the more perspectives we get, more perspective we can have, I think the more to our advantage it would be. And so while writing this book, I think this has just reaffirmed my respect for the human body because, to be fair, when I talk to Stella, when my co-author, when I look at the Chinese medicine doctrines, I think it's just so different to how I'm educated in school. So I think, if anything, it adds to my mind in my respect, and I would encourage anyone to look into it if they have the interest.
Well, you've seen how the American style of healthcare and mindset around healthcare has worked out. So, I mean, hopefully we're shifting for sure. But so I think
we are. I think we are.
Oh yeah, I think so. Well, a part of it is it's our kind of responsibility as fitness professionals that I don't want to say like know the right way to do things because there is no way to do things for, I mean, every single person's individualized and you have to assume that you're not going to be right out the gate and you're going to have to adjust and everything like that. But there are principles that you can, I mean, we're talking about in the very beginning, that haphazard and random approach. Like there are fitness professionals applying that. People think that, they need to follow whatever the crazy person on Instagram is doing. But like there are other fitness professionals out there that are really there to help guide them through a principles-based approach that they're going to be able to apply, and it's going to be potentially infinitely easier, infinitely more simple for them than chasing every little fad. I'm sure you chased more than one fad as well, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the fitness industry, it's a big spectrum. You've got people who are super responsible, knowledgeable, and yet you've got some who's just taking one course and all of a sudden they are a specialist in whatever niche that they claim they are. So but if anything, I think it's a good opportunity for us to stand out if we really have the passion and the knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good rule of thumb to just kind of assume that, yes, that you're not always going to be right. I think that's a very important. And so definitely while I'm reading this book, I mean, what I do with books and what I think, not everybody should do this, but I tend to just pull bits and pieces from, like you were saying, like different methodologies, different perceptions, different philosophies, and pull really what works for me. Different diets. That's how I used to treat diets until I realized, over time, it's just like, okay, it's just really basic stuff here. Get some protein, get some veggies, get some fruits. You're good. You don't have to be all fancy, but so I pull things, and so I'm really excited to see what I can pull from your book. I mean, so far I've loved it. Like I said, there haven't been very many. I don't know if I told you this yet, but it's not often that I can pick up a book and it's easy to read right away. Oftentimes it's like a little bit clunky. You got to get used to the way the person writes, but the way that you write, it flows very easily. It's very easy to digest. It's awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope it can give you, some encouragement. But on the diet part, I think you're definitely right. And I think a lot of times we make things way too fancy. And if we can just stick to the fundamentals, I think, we can all live life a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question for you, Andy, it was great talking to you today. I'm really, I'll check in with you and let you know when I finish this book because I'm definitely enjoying it so far. But I have my very last question I try to ask everybody on the show. How do you feel personally that the fitness industry can improve overall?
I think if we can play a part in asking ourselves, what can we do for the industry and what can we do for the clients? So if we can all be less selfish and if we can all just think from the client's perspective, I think the clients will appreciate us a lot more and the clients will receive what we coach them a lot better. So instead of focusing on ourselves, I think we can put the emphasis and focus on the people that we're serving. I think the industry will be in a much better place.
I appreciate that mission, man. I appreciate that message because I mean that's really all that we can do. It's a people-based industry. We're working with people. Like at the end of the day, what are you accomplishing if you're just letting your ego and your own ideologies kind of lead you in all of your reaction or your interactions that you have with people? So it was great talking with you, man. I'm definitely gonna get back to you and let you know how the book is. But have a good time over there in Hong Kong. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.